Hey folks, I'm Jason Peacock. Today I'm here for a Portal Games double whammy. We've got Imperial Settlers and 51st State. Very similar games, very different themes. Let me give you an overview and a comparison between the two and tell you what I think.
Both these games are for 2 to 4 players, although it is possible to increase that player count with faction boards and factions. It is not recommended. For me, it plays best as a 2-player game. 51st State and Imperial Settlers uses the same game engine. They are very similar games, but the differences between them really make them stand out from each other. In both games, you start out with 4 cards before the first turn. In Imperial Settlers, you draw 2 cards from the common deck and 2 from the faction deck. In 51st State, you draw 6 cards and choose 4 to keep. This is the biggest difference between the two games. In Imperial Settlers, each player has a unique faction deck as well as a common deck. In 51st State, the players all work off one common deck, which has the main deck and one of 2 other decks shuffled in, New Era or Winter. Never both. Additional 50-card decks will be in future expansions, but each faction board in 51st State gives each player a unique set of commerce for contact tokens. The faction boards in Imperial Settlers offers different production items and lets you store certain items. All the buildings get placed off to one side of the faction board, and Imperial Settlers, the common buildings go on one side and the faction buildings go on the other. So we've got our starting hands and now we're ready to begin. First is the lookout phase. 2 new cards are drafted. In 51st State, cards are equal to the number of players plus 1 are flipped and the start player drafts 1. Then the next player. Then the same process is repeated with the next player getting first pick. Imperial Settlers, the players draw 1 card off their faction deck and then draft 2 cards off the common deck in the same way as you do in 51st State. Next is the production phase. In both games, players get stuff, their faction boards produces, their deals produce, and their production buildings produce. Then the fun part, the action phase. Starting with the start player, everyone takes turns performing exactly one action. The actions are as follows. In both games, you can build a building, which is playing a card from your hand. The cost in Imperial Settlers are the resource tokens shown on the top left of the card. If there is a building symbol, then you have to discard another building in play, or the ruins of a raised building in play. The cost in 51st State are an amount of gray contact tokens equal to the distance of the card listed in the top right. In both games, there are 3 different types of buildings. Production buildings, which get played at the top row, immediately granting the good shown on the card, and again at the production phase at the start of every round. Feature buildings get placed in the middle and grant the bonus listed on the card. And action buildings give you an ability you can pay for. So speaking of action buildings, activating one costs an action. This is the same in both games. Put the resource card on the card to show it's been paid for and get the benefit listed. In both games, this is the main way to get points. The majority of the buildings require a cost and resources for victory points, which is what you want to have the most of by the time the game ends. They can also do other stuff like trade resources for other resources or tokens or get some other kind of special ability. There is plenty of variety. Action buildings can be used once or twice around if the card specifically says so, but never more than that. Another option is taking one of your workers and placing it on an opponent's open production location. Only one worker can do this per building each round. You gain the production good on the building and the owner of the building takes a worker meeple from the supply. These colors on the sides of the Imperial Settlers cards are in reference to the other cards. For example, this production location will give you 1 worker for each white building in your empire. Another action is to raise a card from your hand or a building in an opponent's play area. The cost in Imperial Settlers is 1 sword for any card from your hand and 2 swords, or raise tokens, for any common building in your opponent's play area. It could cost 1 extra if your opponent has a shield token on his building. In 51st State, it costs a number of red contact tokens equal to the distance listed at the top left corner of the card to raise from your hand, or 3, 4, or 5 raise tokens for an opponent's building in play. These could cost an extra token if your opponent has a shield on them, same as Imperial Settlers. The reward for raising, whether it's from your hand or an opponent's card in play, are the icons listed in the red banner at the top right corner of the card. If a building in play gets raised, it gets flipped over and is considered to be ruins or a foundation. The owner of said ruins in 51st State gains the items listed in the deal section. In Imperial Settlers, the player gains a wood. The only thing foundations are for now are to help bring new buildings into play. So, in Imperial Settlers, this would be the building cost listed at the cost category of the card. In 51st State, ruins or foundations help bring a new building into play slightly differently, which brings us to another action. Developing. We'll get into that in a minute. Another action that can be used in both games is to use a faction board ability. In both games, you can trade 2 worker meeples for any one resource or a card from any draw pile. The faction board in 51st State has a special one-time use ability where certain resources can be traded for contact tokens. For example, these mutants can trade 1 gun resource for 3 red contact tokens. One mistake I made when playing the game the first 5 times is that we were doing this trade any number of times during the round instead of just once. It made playing my wife, who uses the mutants, very powerful, because the 1 gun for 3 red contact tokens meant she was destroying most of my buildings every turn. So you can only do this once a game round, and you place the resources you were trading on your board to show it's been used. Trading workers for resources or cards can be used any number of times, however. Another action that is the same in both games is making a deal. To do this in Imperial Settlers, simply discard a tomato resource. Take any card from your hand, flip it 180 degrees, and tuck it into the top of the faction board. The item is immediately gained, and like production buildings, acquired every round during the production phase. To make a deal in 51st State, the player discards a number of blue contact tokens equal to the distance on the card, then flip it and gain in the same way. Now, developing. This action is unique to 51st State. At the cost of 1 brick, a player can spend 1 brick resource and discard any building with a matching symbol with the card getting brought into play. If the building being discarded is a foundation, which is a raised building, the symbol doesn't matter. This circumvents having to spend gray contact tokens to bring a building into play and also offers 1 victory point every time a building is developed. I like that even though a building was destroyed by an enemy, it still has a benefit to the owner. There are special development tokens that can be acquired, which means you don't need a matching symbol to develop a building. Another action unique to 51st State is buying and using these contact cards. As an action for 2 worker meeples, you can take the blue or the red card. There's only 1 of each of these available every round. Unused ones get discarded at the end of the round, and once the pile runs out, that's it, they're done. Once they are acquired, they can be played as an action in future rounds for whatever the cost on the card says. These cards are an additional way to get blue or red contact tokens during your turn. Once everyone has gone until they pass, then the round ends. It's worth noting that once you pass, you cannot be the target of raised buildings from an opponent. Then it's the cleanup phase. In Imperial Settlers, each faction board allows the player to store certain types of resources. Factions in 51st State don't allow this. In both games, certain buildings allow storage of resources as well. So any unspent resources are discarded and a new round begins. This is where the games differ. Imperial Settlers has a limit of 5 rounds. You add 1 point per common building in your empire and 2 points per faction building. Add these totals to your current score. Highest score wins. Now 51st State keeps going until one player hits or passes the 25 point mark. This signals the last round, then the players get 1 point per building, added to the end of the round total, and the highest score wins.
So I very much like both games. Great components, card quality is good. I love the multi-use cards. You can make a deal, you can raise, you can turn them into a building, you can discard them to do something else. Figuring out how all the buildings work together this building needs these resources to activate, so you need another building produces those resources. You need to be efficient, which just figuring out that puzzle with all your options is just a wonderful thing. It's brilliant. Any expansion that comes out for any of these games, I'm excited for. I have the Atlanteans, 3 is the magic number. Ignacy tweets out pictures of expansions in development, and I'm just like, oh, yes, please. Can't wait for the Aztecs, which is one thing I like about Imperial Settlers. I like the different factions, the different way they play, the different strengths and weaknesses. That's my wife's favorite. She loves Imperial Settlers. It's her favorite game. She feels that, she likes them both. I mean, 51st State's probably a close second to her, but she likes Imperial Settlers better because she feels that she gets a bigger engine going. She can do more stuff with her cards. I still haven't had a chance to even try the Greeks out because my wife won't give them up. I tried 8 or 9 times to win with the Atlanteans, and I didn't get a victory until I started doing a little deck building with them, which is a bonus of Imperial Settlers. It's got deck building rules. You can customize your deck. If you put all the expansions together, you've got a big fat deck. It's not likely you're going to get the cards you're hoping for to get these combinations working. But once I whittle that deck down, I really got to feel the power of those Atlanteans, and it was so hard to figure them out. But I just love the asymmetrical way that all these different factions play. Now, 51st State, that would be my favorite. If I had to pick one, that would be my favorite. I love the theme. I like that Hiroshima Hex Mad Max universe theme. I like the 25-point end condition in 51st State as well. First of all, the game seems to play a bit quicker. And if somebody's way further ahead and just stomping you, you don't have to play a full 5 rounds. Maybe it'll end a little bit earlier for you. I also think the theme and mechanics mesh together a bit better in 51st State. Let me give you an example. Post office. You spend 1 worker to gain a blue contact token. Yeah, that thematically makes sense. An assassin. Open production of 1 gun. Of course. I find the cards fit better with the resources in 51st State. Not to say that Imperial Settlers doesn't have it. It just really comes to the forefront with 51st State. The big question is, do you get both if you already have one? Well, that's what I'm hoping this review does for you. Are the differences enough for you to go out and grab 51st State if you really like Imperial Settlers? If you're the type of person that buys 2-3 games a month, definitely. I'd say pick it up, put it on your shelf. It's nice to switch things up. They've got a really similar game engine, and they still have a completely different feel. I also really like the patronizing humor of the 51st State rulebook. Let me give you an example of that. Okay, this is under making it deals, okay? I don't want to complain, but that's exactly what happens when you try to be nice. Be a nice scout and you don't raise people. You should raise them. You should raise them all. And the rulebook is just full of little quips like that. Love it. If I had any kind of gripe with 51st State, it's very minor. You end up trading your resources, these nice wooden resources, for cardboard contact tokens. I would have liked for it to be the other way around. You trade in your cardboard and you get wood, and then you use your wood for everything like that. But that's a very minor quibble. And Ignacy, if you're listening, make some wooden contact tokens for us to buy. Anyways, that's my thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it that like, love, and leave your comments down below. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at DicetowerNetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.